supposed to be hearing some stuff from the back. I started to get this inkling and find out that there was even a profession called sound editing, that people did sound for movies, and I didn't know anything about that until I had a course in college where we were watching some of the great American movies of the 70s, you know, the Scorseses and Coppolas and Raffelsons and like all these amazing, you know, movies that were made in the 70s, and just started to notice that there were sound editors at the end, right? If you stayed and watched the credits past the, you know, the caterers and the animal wranglers and the gaffers and the grips and everything, there were sound editors. So that would be kind of the beginning. But then fast forward a bit, having, you know, eventually getting myself to some internships at recording studios that were not in film, just in music, or doing various other, you know, voiceovers for commercials or all kinds of different things here and there. It was around like in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, that Ken Burns' Civil War aired on PBS for the first time. And I was kind of raised on PBS. PBS was big in my house as a kid growing up. And so naturally, like, my parents were into it, and I was probably watching it. I don't know that I was watching it with them, though. I think it was on my own. And one of the things that really struck me was how in this documentary about the Civil War, let's say you had a battlefield, a photograph, you know, and these are like some of the first photographs ever taken, you know, from the very early days of photography. And I remember one very evocative photograph portraying a battlefield at dawn after the battle, and you see the dead bodies kind of strewn, you know, spaced out and strewn across this field. And it's early morning. And I mean, that's the photo. You don't necessarily know it's early morning, except that you're hearing the sound of birds and you're hearing some sounds that I couldn't believe how I felt like I was standing on that field. And I was standing with those dead bodies and I was there. And that was, I get goosebumps now just telling you about it. That to me, there was something about that that just was like, I guess like a light bulb moment. Like, I was just like, wow, damn, like you could have a photo, you could put these sounds, you know, birds, maybe some air and, you know, very minimal, but just the right birds and the right air. And now I feel like I'm there, but I'm sitting in my apartment and it's the late 80s. And then I know, you know, and then as I continued watching, I kept experiencing that same phenomenon of there are photographs and there's sounds. And so that, I think, really is what I had already been starting to be interested in sound and doing, you know, watching movies, listening to sound, doing an exercise where I would sit in, let's say, like a park or something, and just write down everything that I was hearing and just try to focus on and be conscious of what it is that I was hearing. Like, you know, so I'm sitting in a park and there's distant traffic and there are some kids and there are birds and there's some construction that I can hear you know, it's like New York City. There's construction going on, jackhammer. There is a siren every now and then. There are some horns that I hear every now and then. And the next thing I would know, I'm filling up a page, just writing down what is basically a very ordinary, mundane moment in New York City or any city, sitting, you know, and just I did the same thing. I happened to be my first ever job in the film industry was actually working in France on a movie, and we were in a southern region in France, which was a very rural part of France. And then I remember going back to Paris at the end of that before coming back home. and doing the same thing, having done it in New York, doing it again, but sitting now in a park in Paris, um, and just making the same kind of notes, but then like noting how is this different? Like how is the one in Paris different from the one in New York City? And and so that really was like seeing Civil War on PBS, Ken Burns, and then those experiences, that's all part of the beginning of it. But I also used to play music. I played the saxophone, was very heavily into jazz, but all kinds of music, which, I don't play anymore, but the interest in music is unabating. I love every kind of music you could possibly imagine. So, I think that would be it. I mean, the longer answer is that when I was about 11 years old, honestly, if I go back far enough, when I was 4 years old, my grandmother I used to go to, we used to go to my grandparents' house during the summer, for the summers. They were like in Connecticut. They had a house in Connecticut by the ocean. And we'd go there and I loved that. I was a kid. And my grandmother played the piano, and she would do a thing with me where she'd say, okay, I'm going to play, she'd start playing on the piano and she'd say, this is a gallop. And I go galloping around the living room as a 4-year-old. This is a waltz. I go waltzing around the living room, and she'd be playing music and I would be dancing or moving or doing something to that music. So flash forward to when I was about 11, between the age of 11 and 13, I met a friend, and this friend now this is like the mid 70s ish. So this friend was collecting silent comedies like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, all the great silent comedians. And the not so, like the ones that you've never heard of. There are other ones. And so what he would do is mail order company, get these movies, and then we would have a record player and we would play ragtime music along with the movie. So we'd drop the needle on the record and a ragtime song would start, or you just play through the whole record, and then we would cue that up to a Buster Keaton movie or a Charlie Chaplin movie. So that was an early instance of putting sound to image. I then tried an experiment one day where we had been always used ragtime music, and my parents had a great and varied record collection. And I picked out Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata, and I dropped it at the beginning of Charlie Chaplin's The Immigrant, and all of a sudden the movie went from being this slapstick, jaunty, ragtime music kind of comedic experience to more of a drama. Like suddenly that music brought out the aspects of the movie where it's like he's always going after the girl, and then he kind of like gets the girl, but then he loses the girl and he's really disappointed and sad, and that connected with that, and suddenly you were feeling the pathos, right? The all these emotions. So that kind of showed me at an early age how you could take the same image, and depending on what kinds of sounds or music you put with that image, you could actually impart a very different feeling to the viewer. So yeah, I mean, so those would be like some of the formative things for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going back to what you said about you sitting in the park and hearing all of these sounds, and I feel like we've talked about this before, where it's like people just assume that all of these sounds are recorded on set when you're making a film, but a lot of times you're recreating them. For example, if there's a bus going by, you might actually take a sound effect of a bus and add effects on it to make it feel like it's going by versus it actually going by. And so, segueing into like a very basic question, which is, what does a sound designer actually do on a film?
That's a great question, and that's your point is a really good one, in that I get that all the time when I'm talking to people who are not familiar with how movies are made, even though they watch them all the time. And like you said, it's that assumption that it all happens when the movie's being shot, and it doesn't. So what we do, and sound designer, whether you want to use the term sound designer, supervising sound editor, the main point is that most often, although, well, no, that's not true. On when everything was blue, we had Sana, who did Foley, and so it wasn't just me. But generally, it is a team. It's not just one person, although certainly one person can do everything. But it's broken up into certain categories. So generally speaking, for any movie, there's dialogue, there's ADR, which stands for automatic or automated dialogue replacement. Is an ancient term which was pegged to an ancient method which was not used anymore for looping. Um, Dialogue, ADR, loop group, which loop group is where you get a group of actors to come into a studio and you record them recreating the crowds that you see in a movie. Like, you say there's a restaurant scene, and generally when you shoot a restaurant scene, you tell the extras to pantomime having a conversation, to not actually have a conversation, although there have been movies made where they've done that and they just mic the actors closely. But generally, you have to recreate that later because you want nice, clean dialogue when you're recording initially. So you tell the extras to just pretend
Right.
like that, and then that gets put in. Then you recreate it. So and you get crowds in, like I just on the movie I did recently, Song Sung Blue, where there are concert scenes. And it's Neil Diamond's music being performed by these Neil Diamond interpreter couple, and we had our loop groups, doing sing-alongs because the scenes are recreating what it was like for the audience to sing along in the theaters or the bars or the casinos or the clubs or wherever they were singing, karaoke in restaurant. People are singing along. So loop group came in. So that's loop group. Then there is Foley, and Foley is where a Foley artist is in a studio creating sounds that are usually sync sounds for human movement in a movie. So footsteps, um, sitting down, getting up, but things sometimes like rolling a cart or something, and they may create the sound of the cart also. And they can create sounds even for, good Foley artists do amazing creative work and create sounds you would never imagine could be made in a studio full of old junky props, or props. They're not always junky, but they're basically, a Foley studio is a room full of shoes and all kinds of household items and just objects, and then different surfaces to walk on, whether it's parquet floor, concrete, or sand, or whatever, water. So anyway, you have a Foley artist. That stuff goes into the movie, and that's all throughout the movie for footsteps and everything else. And then you have sound effects, and sound effects can be different things. It can be backgrounds. Backgrounds are the environments, creating, like what I was talking about in the park. So you have air, you have traffic, you have birds, you have crickets, you have kids in the background, you have construction, all that background sound for any movie, any scene, anywhere. It could be a tropical jungle, it could be an ocean side, it could be underwater, it could be in outer space, it could be, it could be very literal, or it could be wildly fantastical. But that's the environments. Then you have specific effects and sound design. Sometimes we distinguish between kind of hard effects, like maybe slightly more mundane, although you could take any effect and put some imaginative texture or spin on it, whether it's a door closing, a car going by, like you mentioned. we take whooshes or animal growls or things sometimes and put them along with a car by, just to make it.
Mm.
I mean, I could cite some scenes in Severance where that was done. So there's that. And then there's the more creative, like impressionistic, fantastical sound, whether it's in an animated movie, it's in a Marvel comics movie, a Batman movie, like an Avatar movie, a movie that's a Star Wars, galactic kind of experience. So, that's a whole area of sound as well. So I think that's all of the types of sound.
And then how do you determine if a movement needs Foley or a sound effect? Is Foley more specific? Is that why they need to recreate it to the picture?
I think it's more so that Foley is more directly connected to human movement. So you wouldn't do a car by with Foley because cars, you wouldn't do gunshots in Foley. That's not to say that you wouldn't go out and record gunshots specifically. That's done all the time, recording gunshots for a movie. But you're not going to do that in a Foley on a Foley stage, which is generally an indoor space. Um, I think there are some Foley stages that have had an outdoor component so that they can do, car doors, like car doors. That's like a category where it's sound effects, but you go out and record them yourself. You can either record them yourself, let's say a car door, or a gunshot, or an explosion. I mean, depending on your budget, you could go out and you'd have to find a place where you could blow things up, and then go out and record that, and people do that. But it's more so what can you do that's more directly related to human movement versus other kinds of sounds that are, mechanical, water related, combustible, fire related, explosions, gunshots, underwater stuff, other kinds of water sounds, ocean sounds, things like that, where you really have to go out into the world to record them.
Yeah. And then, for when everything was blue, you came in. I had a call with you pretty early before we even shot it.
Mhm.
Because of the way we were shooting it, I wanted to get your perspective on sound. But I'm curious for other projects like Severance or Song Sung Blue, like at what point in the process do you usually come in from a sound perspective?
That's a that's a good question. I mean, they're all good questions. I find I'm saying that after every question.
Thank you.
Um, Ideally, we come in before the show or the movie has even been shot, so that we can talk to the director, we can talk to the filmmakers, and even say talk to the location mixer and try. And the location mixer's job is to get good, clean dialogue. That's their primary assignment, and that's mainly what there's time for on a shoot. Um, but if they can get some sounds from the environments they're in, that can be very helpful. Um, so where you can coordinate with them in advance, and with the director, so the director can try and see if there's a way to get some of this sound while they're shooting. But usually you don't often count on that because shoots, as you know, can be very hectic, and there's really like barely enough time to record the dialogue properly. And that's really what we need, is for the dialogue to be well recorded. Um, so we come on as early as before the movie's shot, but as late as after the movie's been edited and it's done. There have been some projects where the movie is locked, the cut is locked, and then I come on, or we come on. It's not just me. We come on, and so that would be the latest you come on. I mean, I guess even later would be inheriting a project from some other sound folks who started it and for whatever reason didn't finish it, and then you come on. That's even later. But generally, you're coming on anywhere between before it's been shot to after it's been cut.
Do you prefer to come on before it's shot?
I do. I definitely prefer to come on before it's shot. It gives us time. I mean, reading the script is always a good thing too, because that's a good, for me anyway. I love reading a script, and it's a way of preparing, and it's a way that before I've even seen the movie can sort of imagine the movie for myself and and kind of let my mind run wild before finding out what the reality of the movie really is. And sometimes I read a script and I find my thoughts were not in the right direction and the movie is something else, or sometimes they were totally in the right direction. But yeah, coming on, I like coming on beforehand just for that kind of opportunity to connect with the director and start talking about sound and thinking about sound.
For Severance specifically, did you come on before they shot it, or was that more of a later in the process?
I think they had already, I knew I was on, and like I was hired, probably, yes, probably before they shot it. But there wasn't a whole lot of interaction, I think, until, you see, that's episodic. So you can have a situation where they might have shot the first episode and then I start working on it while they're continuing to shoot. I think they had pretty much, on the first season, I think they had it all pretty much in the can, like all shot. And then we came on. So I'm trying to think. I think it was like shot, but not fully edited. So we didn't have access to all the episodes, which I didn't really necessarily want access to later episodes. There's an evolution that happens throughout the season. And hey, Kat. Um, I was trying to see if I heard any footsteps from that cat.
Have you been hearing his ball?
No, I haven't heard anything. And then I saw the cat, and then because of the conversation we're having, I thought, see, that might be in a movie. You might do some Foley for that cat jumping up because you don't actually really, cats are very stealthy and you don't hear their feet mostly. But in
Mm-hmm.
movies, you do. Like when you want that little sneaky, stealthy cat, or the surprise of the cat suddenly jumping and landing behind your head, you would hear, you'd put a sound in for that. But on Severance, yeah. So the thing that was cool for Severance was that I started working with Ben Stiller and Jeff Richmond, who's the supervising editor on Severance, and he's really like such a key person on that job. He's like the linchpin in communicating between Ben and me and the others who are doing sound. To start communicating as to what they want. And the biggest thing for Severance is that Lumon, being this kind of unreal, surreal environment that doesn't exist really in the real world, although it has elements of things that exist in the real world, but it's taking them and combining them in a way that needs to feel a little odd and, different. And then maybe more than odd and different as the show goes on, like a little foreboding or a little oppressive or different things. So I'm trying to remember like how this worked because I must have known more about the story when I started to design the sounds for what Lumen would be and the doors and the whole transition when when a character goes into the elevator and they go through that transition and there's a very specific set of sounds that you hear. It's like a recipe that we came up with, but it has there are dings that you hear which I made from the alert sound you hear when you're on an airplane, like to turn on your
Mm.
seatbelt, or you can, to turn on, to buckle your seatbelt, to, like synthesizer sounds of, like ascending and descending pitches, things like that. To trying to remember some suctiony kind of whoosh sounds. Still, the like the static. There's this little like really high pitched, chippy, very pointed, staticky sound that's in there. So it was a process of coming up with these things and then playing them the examples and then them saying yes, no, yes, less of this. Oh, we could use this in later episodes. Like I had this idea in Severance that the room tone, one thing that we do, it's almost sometimes it's just we do it as a technical thing or a creative thing. We put room tone in a scene, even like interior, even just an ordinary house like the house I'm sitting in. And if you put a mic in here and then you made a recording, played that back in Pro Tools, let's say, you would hear a steady a tone. It's like an air, sound of air. And
Mm.
in an interior, there could be some element of like you're hearing the refrigerator hum, or you're hearing like a vent. If it's an office, you're hearing a vent or a computer hum or an air conditioner hum or something, right? So my idea was that maybe the idea that Lumen was almost like this evil host preying on its employees, so that if you imagine like those rooms, those corridors, it's almost like the giant arteries or something of this monster. And the people are just living within or working within this being, this kind of malevolent being, right?
Mm.
So so the so my idea was, why don't this air sound, which is like, what if we actually recorded human, like what I just did, like what if we recorded that and used it as the room tone,
Ooh.
and we could play with that, make it go up or down or pitch it different ways, but it would give this hopefully this just like subconsciously weird, eerie, creepy feeling, maybe. Like, you don't know how things are going to work until you try them.
Yeah.
So they liked the idea, but they said, let's not do it immediately. Like, let's save that for the later episodes when things start to, get more dramatic, fall apart, get crazier, get more surreal. And now when I look back on both seasons, that's how each season kind of goes. It starts out more in the offices, more ordinary. And as things progress, and as the relationships and the plots unwind and everything, things just intensify and they get stranger. So that really worked, because so we did things, and I went in and I even got animal. I got like some wolf breath and some other kind of things that was even stranger and maybe more not just stranger, but like more scarier or more visceral, than what I was just a plain, exhaling of breath or something, and I was able, like in the corridors when they go to the break room, or later in season 2, there's like this dark corridor that leads to an elevator. I took a lot of those kinds of sounds, and I, also we have amazing libraries that consist of both things that we or colleagues have exchanged that we've recorded ourselves on other shows, or just amazing sound design libraries that are out there, that are available, that are licensed, that you can purchase. So we all have big libraries of sound, that kind of sound, and then there's a lot of manipulation that happens. I'll take a sound like that I find in a library, but I'll start pitching it and bending it, stretching it, and doing things to alter, just so, because really the way it works is I hear things first. I hear them in my head, and then the challenge to me is, okay, I've heard this thing in my head. Now how am I going to make this, how am I going to transfer from inside my head to out into the world, or to
From
at
your
least
innie to your outie.
yeah, from my exactly. That's great. From my innie, to the outer world,
Yeah.
and it starts like, if I do sound design, I want to first make sure that that's working for me. If it does something for me, listening to it, then I know, okay, I was transported by something that I put together. If I was transported, there's a good chance someone else will be. So now the next step is, let's play it in a mix. Sometimes, a lot of times, we start a mix and it's just like colleagues in the mix, not the director, but fellow mixers and other sound editors, and we're together. And so the first people, or I may play it if there are other people on the job working near me, or I might send, like, bounce something and send it, I may actually test it out on colleagues, just say, like, come listen to this. What do you think? Like, if I won't say, I'll just play it for them. And if I look at their faces and there's some reaction, I know I'm on the right track. So, and then you're playing it, then eventually you put it in front of the director and you're mixing it in with the music and in with the dialogue and in with the Foley and in with all the other things going on. So it becomes a piece of a larger whole and part of an environment. So yeah, and then once it's integrated in the environment and everything, the director, in this case, then Ben Stiller, finally walks into the mix, and this supervising editor has already been there and given a lot of notes, very specific notes, and kind of guided us because he knows what Ben likes and doesn't like. So he's guiding us. And I'm using that as an example, but this is oftentimes the process for many projects. And then finally the director comes in, and by then you've kind of vetted a lot of your material and combine it with everything else, and then they're hearing it in context. And then, at that point they're going to say yay or nay, or yay, but let's tone it down, or, I like, it's amazing. Every director has his or her, or their, likes and dislikes, which seems so random to us because we're so used to doing different things for different people. But it'll be like, for a great contrast, just again, these are both directors that everyone will know. When I worked with Wes Anderson back on Darjeeling Limited and then Fantastic Mr. Fox, on Darjeeling Limited, there were some scenes. There's a scene where one character is like falls into a lake or like a body of water, and it's is gasping to not drown, and grabs onto some like big floating jugs that they're like, and there was all this. We added this low end for the sound of the jugs being hit and hitting the water. And he said, oh, I can't, like, he said, I hate low end in movies. I don't like the sound of low end. It like, big Hollywood movies have lots of low end, and I want the sound in my movies to feel like it's just lo-fi and it's coming like a documentary, like not. I don't want a lot of sound in the surrounds. That movie has an opening scene where Bill Murray is riding along in the tuk-tuk in India, and stuff is whizzing past him. Sacred cows, other cars are just like flying past. And I'm thinking, this is so much fun for sound design because we're going to use the spatial perspective and have the sound go from the middle of the screen, whizzing past the side and behind you. And he heard, we had him come in and watch that very first scene, and he almost like went running screaming out of the mixing studio, because he said, it's just too much for me. I can't, like, I don't want to hear things that dynamically. I would just want the, yes, I like the sounds themselves, but I don't want them flying past me. I just want them right in the middle. And so, but back to the low end, the comparison was, flash forward to working on Severance with Ben Stiller. He likes low end. He loves, like, if we put whooshes in, he would prefer that a whoosh is more than whoosh. He doesn't want that higher, airy part of the whoosh. He wants, the almost to the point of it being like a subharmonic, like low frequency, sub kind of a thump, or then something that's airy. And that's just his taste. So it's often, when you're working, you're doing sound design, it's really about knowing what the movie is. Like on When Everything Was Blue, we knew that the aesthetic was everything is being heard through a camcorder. So, that would be a little more like Wes Anderson's lo-fi, directive to make everything sound really like it was shot by, like in our case, in When Everything Was Blue, it was shot by a little girl, through a camcorder, or or the parents, or whomever was in the family. And we kind of like, that's a sound that we all know, and the point is in fact to recreate that sound, to make sure that it sounds like the sound that everyone in the audience knows, so that they can, so that as soon as they hear it, and they will never know. I see, I'm revealing a secret now.
Go for it.
but
It's
but
out.
they, yeah, it's out, right? They will never know that, I mean, we did have real camcorder sound. I shouldn't, I don't want to. There was real camcorder sound, but I did things to kind of accentuate that, like,
Yeah.
just to make sure that it was thin sounding, or to, I don't know, just to kind of bring out some of the, like like the mic bumps, the hitting, like, if when you hit the mic on a camcorder, or you drop a camcorder, there's going to be a how would you how would you describe that, like kind of a staticky, kind of distorted sound, right? So
Yep.
we spent time, and you and I talked about it, and spent time in trying, and I think I might have asked you, like, oh, in all your camcorder recordings, do you have some of those sounds? Like, or did we do a thing like where I said, like, just hit the mic on the camcorder or something, and then send me that sound.
Yeah, I went outside and I just like wrestled with it in the grass.
Right, exactly. So, it's really a matter of, every project is different, and it's really a matter of learning. It's like I've said to people before, it's almost like I'm an actor with a director, and I'm asking, what's my motivation? How does my character think? How does my character react? What's the backstory? If you were an actor and you were researching how to get into character, I know a lot of actors, they'll invent backstory, they'll flesh out the character way beyond what's in the script, just so that they can inhabit that character. I think we do that also. We do that with sound. We kind of want to be as immersed in the world that's being created, that the director is creating, as possible, so that we can go out there and find all the sound. Like, I went to a screening not long ago of the movie Surat, the Spanish
Oh yeah.
movie, which is up for not just the, like, best international feature, but it's up for best sound. And it's an amazing sounding film. And I was able to meet the supervising sound editor, and she talked about, and they did a Q&A with her and the director, and they talked about how once she was hired before the movie was shot, right? Or maybe the movie had been shot, I don't know, but it hadn't been cut yet fully. And once she had a sense of what she needed, she apparently disappeared for like 3 months. Nobody could find her, and she was in the Moroccan desert, because it's a part of the movie starts, and it's a rave in the desert. Um, and I don't, we didn't get into what were all the, I think she did some wind recordings. There are amazing instances of wind in that movie, recordings of wind and vehicles, amazing, very naturalistic, very different from a Hollywood movie. But she went out and, disappeared, literally, like people couldn't find her. And she went out and recorded, did all that research and recording. So, the point simply being that, it's an adventure. I think what I love so much about it is, it's almost like we get to travel without, I live in New Jersey, I work in New York City, or I work from home, and I don't travel per se. But for each project, I'm really traveling. Like, there is really a journey that's happening. And so, and it's that same journey that you're passing on to your audience. You're actually working with the director to then, as a team, pass that on as a complete film, to the audience. So,
Yeah, and I think like to that point about, being in the, did you say the desert? Was it the desert?
in Morocco, yeah, the
Yeah,
desert.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But in that story, I don't think people realize how much research also goes into sound design. Like, for example, and only going to mention this because I know it because it's our project, but for when everything was blue and that 9/11 scene in the morning, you had to research a Nokia ringtone for that time frame. And if it
Right.
was a 2005 versus a 2001 and it was on a bigger stage, like people would be pissed. They'd be like,
Right.
I know that ringtone is off. And it's
Right.
like these tiny details that are just invisible until they're not.
Right, absolutely. And you'll get called out. I mean, there's so many, everyone, who does this kind of work will have some story, whether it happened to them or it happened to a colleague, where certainly like on, I know the colleague who I haven't mentioned yet, who had done the sound design for Civil War, his name is Ira Spiegel, and he was one of my first mentors because I actually, after watching Civil War, I got a chance to work with him, I don't know, like 5 years later. And the next thing I knew, I was an assistant with him. So, I was able to, and he was one of the people that really got me into the business by hiring me, and enabled me to do my first sound effects editing job on one of those PBS kind of Ken Burns documentaries, which was The West, which Ken Burns didn't direct, but he produced. But Ira would tell stories about having used some train whistle that wasn't, because now we're talking historical documentaries, right? So he used a train whistle or a bird call or something, and getting letter, when people used to write letters for things like this, and not send angry like tweets or something, be the equivalent now. Um, but there being letters saying, that I know what that sound is, and that's not at all the right sound, So yes, that is
Yeah.
something that we try to be authentic. But there's a balance between being authentic and finding a sound that really works dramatically, that conveys an emotion in some way, or a sense of movement or something.
And on Severance, just because I'm so familiar with the show and your work is incredible on it, I was curious if there was like a recognizable sound that took longer for you guys to nail than the audience would realize.
Okay, that's a really good question. Let me think. A sound that took longer to nail. Trying to think. That transition sound is complex. There's a lot of things going on. I think that kind of came together little by little. So that probably, but by the end of the first episode, we had pretty much nailed it. So in the sense that became a recurring sound, that maybe depending on the context, because every time they use that sound, there are slight differences.
Oh,
The
really?
shot, well, like, if for no other reason that they're shot differently, the timings are like, there's a Zolly shot that's part of that, where the faces zoom in on the faces and they come in and out. Those Zolly timings are different. There are things that happen at the beginning, the way, like, sometimes the elevator lands and it kind of, there's a visible landing that you see visually, the actors, like they bounce or something, and you can put a sound to that. I think maybe like that would be an example where maybe the first few times there wasn't much of a landing. It was just like the transition happens and then the elevator doors open, and you don't get a sense of the elevator actually vroom, like stopping like that. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden in one episode they put that in, and I was like, I think it was Helly was in the elevator for whatever episode, like 3 or 4 or something. And I was like, oh, it would be really cool to have and Ben loves low end, right? So like, let's have a nice, like some low end sound. So I put that in, and everyone really liked the sound. So I just started like making that part of the whole transition sound. And whether you really visually saw the elevator come to a stop, I would put it in anyway, and everyone just kind of bought that as, oh yeah, yeah, of course, that's part of the sound.
Hmm.
So, that would be an example of a sound evolving, I mean, as the show goes on. I'm trying to think. I don't know, a lot. I think I did, because I pushed when we started out, and I was doing, they actually, now I'm remembering, they asked me when they were, before I was really officially on the job, they asked me to design some sound inside Lumen for some kind of transitional scenes in the first couple episodes with Petey and with Mark, and where Mark is like, it's like Petey is having some moments. You're with his character and he's at home and he's like shaving, and all of a sudden his bathroom mirror turns into the bathroom, the men's room at
Mm.
Lumen, and suddenly he's standing in front, and then suddenly you're like the camera, does a 360 or 180, and you're in the middle of the office, and there are these weird transitions. They asked me to do that way before we came on, and I just
Mm.
did those scenes, and I really pushed it, and it was much more drastic than anything that was actually used in the show. Like everything, when I was pushing things and making them a lot more dynamic, what ended up in the show was a lot milder in a sense, or subtler, and it works, but it's not as over the top as the stuff I had done originally. So,
Yeah.
that would be like a reverse evolution. It's almost like you start out with something that's pretty like dramatic, and it winds up being a lot simpler or more subtle or something like that.
Yeah, it's also interesting, like to the innie and outie point, where the audience is constantly navigating the psychological split of those two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Did sound design play a role in helping the audience, besides that kind of transition whoosh? Like, was there sound design that helped the audience feel the divide between those two worlds when you were
Mm.
in Lumen versus in, I guess, the other real world?
Absolutely. When you're in Lumen, the sound is very minimal and it's very dry. The rooms we took great care to take the production sound and suck all the natural room echo. If they were recording on a sound stage, we found ways to really minimize so that it sounded almost like they were in a like in a booth recording it, like as as dead and dry as those kind of spaces are. We tried to impart that feeling to their voices, and then to the rooms and the air and everything, panning it, not panning it just going too crazy, panning it into the surrounds, but keeping it in front of you. And then when you cut outside to the real world, then that sound really was breathing. Like we were taking that sound and panning it into the surrounds, and just feeling the air and feeling the, if you're out, literally, especially if you're outside, but even if you're inside their homes, you'd hear some birds or some element, wind there. Well, it's always taking place during the winter. So you're hearing wind sounds, like there's some scenes with, what are their names again? His sister and her husband, who's a writer. And they're in their house, and they're in a house in the woods. So I was always trying, like, you can't use crickets because it's not summertime. And so I was just trying to give a feeling of the wind from outside. So yeah, I mean, it was digging into the real sounds and the exterior sounds versus these dry kind of
Sterile.
sterile and minimalist sounds in Lumen.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so well done. It's like it's one of my favorite shows. And then just to pivot to another project of yours, which I love, which is Manchester by the Sea. It's a
Mm,
bit older, like I guess now 10 years ago, which is
yeah,
crazy.
exactly. 10 years.
But that's more of like a natural soundscape. What was your experience working on that? Did you read the script first before you came on? Like, what was that process like?
So I had worked with Kenny Lonergan, the director, on his previous movie Margaret, and he let me know that, and like, God bless him for doing this, because we love it when the director wants to have you back. And so he said, I really want you to do the sound. And he said, so I think he sent me the script, and I read the script, and then he said, we're having an early screening, we're starting to cut the movie, and I'd love for you to come and watch this first cut that we have. So I went and watched it, and it was pretty much like the movie it turned out to be at that point already. And then he pulled me aside afterwards, and he said, look, I really want you to go, and we have the budget. I want you to go to all the locations that are in the movie, and I want you to record the sound in those locations.
Wow.
And so I went up to Beverly, Mass, and Gloucester, Mass, and I recorded in the high school. I recorded in Pratty's, which is a bar by the docks over there.
Hmm.
I recorded the marina and the docks and the like the the just the boats in the water. But I recorded like nighttime tone out. It was kind of when I went up. I think it was like November or something, so it was kind of cold, getting cold. I recorded water lapping up on the shore, recorded air both during the day, went to a cemetery and recorded sound and got just great, like distant, really distant town, like not even city because it's smaller than a city, but hearing like a lawnmower way off in the distance, or maybe it was a leaf blower because it was November. Trying to think like it was great. It was great that he wanted to do that, and I used, all the like in the hospital. There are hospital scenes. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so we went to Tewksbury. We went to the hospital there and
Wow.
recorded. I even had me and my colleague. We had, this is something we often do in Loop Group, but we did this in real life. We had doctors walk past the mic and have conversations and walk past the mic to use for the scenes in the hospital.
That's so cool. I love
So,
that.
so that's all, yeah, sound effects that we, all those environments and all of that went into, to what the sound of that movie is. But then beyond that, it's a very reality based world of sound. So it's not like Lumon, right? It's really about, but it's because Kenny's use of music and the incredible, oh my god, I'm getting goosebumps just remembering it, the way he uses, I can't remember exactly what piece of music it is, but it's an opera.
Hmm.
No, it's not an opera. Is it an
It's like a
opera?
string, isn't it? Like a
Yes, it's like a Vivaldi or something. During the fire, during the whole scene where
yeah.
what's the character's name? Do you
Uh,
remember the Casey
I just
Affleck's
Casey
character?
Affleck's
Yeah.
character. Oh, I
um
forget.
but just the whole where he has, he suddenly has to run home and find that his house is on fire, right?
Yep.
And dropping, so that was kind of really pulling back, letting the music really score that scene and pulling out of the natural sound. But if I remember correctly, you do hear some sounds that poke through that in a specific way that is very evocative. And
Hmm.
and that was an example of a director really having, and this has happened with other directors too, where it's not like a fantasy movie, right? It's not, you're not creating some world, some like fantastical world, but it's reality. But the directors have these really specific ideas about what reality should be. So for example, there's the scene where he's got his buddies over and they're playing ping pong in the basement, and and then his wife comes down and she breaks it up.
Yeah.
And the original ping pong that was recorded on set was not really working. It was not great because again, it's like the main point is to record the dialogue, and so the ping pong was just kind of weak. It wasn't well mic'd, and ping pong is such a specific sound that everyone can relate to. So the idea was I was going to sweeten, which is a term that we has been used forever. It means you take a sound that you already have, but you add to it. Like, Foley can be a sweetener. You're basically sweetening the sound to make it sound more, to make it sound better, to make it sound more of what it is. Like, so let's make the ping pong really sound like ping pong. Like you have this sound, everyone has this sound in their head of what ping pong sounds like, right? So I
Yeah.
had like 5 different recordings of people playing ping pong. So I listened to all the recordings and I'm thinking like which one of these really captures the essence of ping pong? It's well recorded, the ball, the sound of the ball hitting the paddle and the table, all that. So I cut that in. And I had the other ones like waiting in the wings, just in case for some reason Kenny didn't like it. Sure enough, he listens to it and he's like, and I'm thinking this is like the sound of ping pong. He's gonna love this. And he listens to it and he's like, what is it? What's up with the ping pong sound? Like it's not that somehow that doesn't really sound like ping pong to me. And I'm thinking, okay, um, fair, that's fair enough. Like, it's not my movie, I
Right.
need to find out what is the sound that he, thinks that ping pong should sound like. So I started, I just played him without cutting it in like wild. I played him these 5 different recordings. And there had been one recording that I was avoiding like the plague because I just thought this is like very, I don't know, it just something about it doesn't feel like the sound of ping pong that I know. It sounds like a weird kind of ping pong to me. And
Hmm.
sure enough, that's the one that he really liked. And he said, "Oh, that's the one. That sounds like ping pong to me." So, that's the sound that I put in. I mean, I'm sure I haven't seen that movie in so long, but that just shows you how subjective sound can be. And it's just, yeah, and it's back to knowing who you're working with, and doing experiments and playing things for them until you arrive at what it is that they hear in their head. I mean, I really think like our job is to be an instrument that the director can play to get the sounds out that they have in their head. So
Mhm.
it's like if were putting a saxophone in the hands of your director, how could you get them to play that saxophone in such a way that it's emitting the sounds that they want it to play? And so that's kind of like what we're trying to do. It's trying to build out or expand those sounds.
Yeah, and I want to talk quickly about picture lock, because I know that's a big thing
Hmm.
in your job where, you know, you'll get the cut and then they'll say it's picture lock, but then there's changes. And so I guess I think you call it conforming, where it's like versioning in post when it changes, like all the work you have to do when they
Yes.
change certain spots. I'd love to hear from your perspective what that process is like.
That's a great question. I just dealt with that for a project that was really extensive. So it's called conforming or reconforming. Used to just be called conforming, and somehow, like in the last 5 to 10 years, it turned into reconforming. Um, More footsteps for the cat, by the way. Um, And luckily, we now have programs that you can sort of feed in the old cut and the new cut, and it does a lot of the work for you. And I'm just actually a little bit of a late arrival to that process because I haven't had a big conforming job in a while, but I had one just a couple weeks ago. And because the early versions of those programs, I tried them, and this is like more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I didn't like they were gobbling up sounds and tracks in the kind of, like electronic, like digital automatic way of rendering the new cut, and it's
Mhm.
taking scenes and things and reorganizing them. They're longer, they're shorter, they've been swapped, there's a different take being used. So there's a lot of, can get complicated. Like you want to keep the same carby, but now it's got a different timing. And so in the early versions of those programs, they were just kind of like suddenly it would reconform your scene, and that carby is gone. Like it somehow gobbled it up, and you have to just learn the tricks of how to save it. It's just things to learn. So I always found that I trusted the process more if I could just do it manually. Flash forward to like 3 weeks ago, and there's a great documentary that's now making a festival circuit. It's called "Steal This Story, Please," and it's the life story of Amy Goodman, who's had Democracy Now! Radio, and I don't know if it's YouTube, it's a podcast, if it's a broadcast. But she's a person that's just been speaking truth to power as a journalist for 40, 50 years. Um, so I was pulled on late to they had done a mix in New York, then they made changes to the picture. Someone did a reconform and they mixed in LA, and then they did further changes, and then they called me. The other person wasn't available. They called me to to reconform the changes. And it was like many, many, many tracks of mixed tracks, and you have to preserve the mixer's automation, all the moves that they made. Make sure you do it very carefully so that you don't throw anything off. And it's really meticulous. And I did it manually the way I used to, and it took me forever. Like it took a very long time. And I said after that, never again. And I'm actually literally, when I get off this podcast, I'm teaching myself how to use Matchbox. And
Mm.
I'm going to use it on a short, I did like a 60-second like tone, like a kind of like a like almost not a music video, but something for a musician named Indigo Spark. And she did, and it's this beautifully shot, like very just like a poem basically, with her voiceover and her daughter who's like a toddler, and it's beautiful footage of her and her daughter interacting. um, and there's a 60-second version and a 30-second version. And the 30-second version is a cut down of the 60-second version. So I'm about to use Matchbox to cut down the 60-second to the 30-second. Yeah.
I wanted to touch on what we briefly chatted about in the pre-call because I thought it was really fascinating. And obviously, when you look at your IMDb, you've done so many different projects, but in film, there's a lot of lulls of time, regardless of if you're at the top of your game or you're just getting started. And you said something really impactful to me, which was kind of your own version of manifesting and like how you think about that. I would love to have you kind of re-explain that here.
Yeah, so I found, like, from day one when I was just trying to break into the business, and it was always like a slow process of, like, my goal was every year just like get to know more people and hopefully maybe make a little more money than I made the year before. Which I can't say that that's always been the case, but we're freelancers, so we have our ups and downs. But basically, when I start a campaign, of looking for work, which means whatever that means. I mean, in the old days, I mean, literally, like the beginning days, it was going to the facility where the work was done with a resume. It was like what we used to call the walk of shame, and just knocking on people's doors in cutting rooms where there were editors and sound editors and saying, "Hey, here's my resume." To sending out emails and whatever you have to do, like all the different things you do to look for work. And I always find, and I'm doing that now, like I'm coming out of a lull now, actually, getting busy again. And, you know, or you have your eye on a job, you hear about a job and you say, "Oh, I would love to work on that job." I found that most of the times that I try and do that, I don't get the job.
Hmm.
But what happens is that I get some other job that I didn't even know was out there. Something crosses my path, and the work the work comes. So it's this almost like this karmic kind of relationship between, if I'm looking for the work, I won't get the work that I'm looking for, but I'll get some other work, and that other work can sometimes be something incredible that I would have never imagined I would work on while I was looking for the other work that in fact didn't come to pass. So it's like,
Yeah.
yes, it's like this manifesting. I'm looking for work. I'm making an effort. It's like looking for work is one of the hardest things you can do, I'm sure, for any field. And I've been very lucky to have some runs of work where I haven't had to look, especially in the last 10 years. But it's like you're just wishing for, working for that work, and I guess putting it out there, that you want the work, and the work seems to come in, even though it's not the work that you were aware of.
It sounds like a balance of putting in effort, like you said, but also not being attached to what door it comes through.
Yes, that's a good way of describing it. I mean, it's right. It's that.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, it's really great advice because those moments are hard because you're like, I need work. And so being able to like, do everything you can and then also let it go. is not, it's easier said than done.
It is, oh, absolutely. And letting it go is hard. And the disappointment, and there have been some jobs where it really, I mean, there was a job where I was working for, a very well known producer who had very well known projects, which I did some of those, but there was one that he said, if that job comes to New York and if it's going to be posted in New York, you're going to do it. Right. And this was like, he was a person who could make that decision. And the job did come to New York, but it got to be a lot more complicated in terms of who got to determine who was going to do it. And it wasn't, and in the end, the picture editor had interviews, and I was interviewed, and I thought I was going to do the job based on what I had been told. But the picture editor had other ideas, and I think the person had other people in mind. And so I didn't get the job. And I was really disappointed because, I had my expectations raised by the person telling me, "Oh, you're going to definitely do the job." So I think in this business, you really have to, as much as you can, and it's easier said than done, expect the unexpected. Be prepared for both disappointment, even with things that you really, even someone even told you. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes people promise you, or it's not put in writing, it's verbal, or give you the impression that you'll be doing a job, and in fact you don't do it. But conversely, jobs will come out of nowhere. I mean, I've gotten some jobs absolutely out of nowhere. I did a stint of working with Roger Waters, the Pink Floyd's Roger Waters, and it turned into an amazing run of about 5 years where it started with a concert documentary, The Wall. And that just came, I was working on a facility, and then somebody somehow was looking around and got in touch with the managers of different facilities. And, and they told me, and I came up to me one day and said, "How would you like to work on this?" And I said, "Wow, I would love to work on that." And so, that just came out. I didn't know that it was out there. I had no idea that that someone had shot this concert movie that was also a documentary, that had great creative sections in it that were not in the concert. And then it turned into a huge, like, creative experience that then begot more. I then wound up doing sound design for his concert tours, that was not at all film based. And that was a departure from all the film stuff that I mostly ever do. And I was, doing like for, it was so cool, like for Coachella, where he played a concert in that space, which is an 80,000, it fits 80,000 people on a huge grass polo field, right? With there was some seating in there too. And he had, like, it had started in the concert footage, but like playing like a helicopter flying overhead and making that feel real. And this was then done in all the arena, like he did 2 years of touring, and in all the arenas they were playing this sound design. And I had designed this helicopter to really feel like it was above you and then passing over your head. And I was in the audience and at Coachella, and that moment happens where the helicopter goes from the back to all the way and like crashes onto the stage, but it's all sound, right? It's not actually happening. It's not even really a set. Maybe there's some visual effects that evoke it. And people, when the sound of the plane, I think it was like a plane, there was a helicopter and a plane, and the sound of the plane goes overhead, and people were going like this, like they were ducking their heads, like they felt like it was real.
Oh my
So,
God.
that was definitely a career highlight for sure.
Wow.
Just being in the audience and feeling, being able to create something sonically that you could see literally, because even with stuff you do for movies, you don't you don't go, you don't end up in a theater usually watching, seeing people react in such a physical, visceral way, like people ducking because they think there's like something flying over their heads. So
Yeah,
that was a pretty like special thing
that's
to be
so
part of.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Okay, before I wrap up with the last
Yes.
question, is there anything you want to share about what you're doing now, any projects or anything really?
Here's what I would say. Sound is a universal language, but I worked for someone many years ago when I was starting out who did he wrote some books about kind of like the theory of sound, Tony Schwartz. And he used to say that humans are not born with ear lids. So sound differs so when you're talking especially about cinematic sound, you have these two main components of the visual and the sonic. And his point was you can always close your eyes and not see an image, but you really, I mean, the best you can do is put your hands over your ears, and even then you cannot, if it's a loud sound, you cannot get rid of it. It's going to still
Mm,
be there. You can't, there's something about sound that's more I'm trying to think of it, but it's certainly more environmental. But in being kind of all around us, it almost goes beyond into a spiritual place. Like it's just that, if you want to say that it's, I mean, I don't want to sound too like high blown or anything, but if it's godlike, or if it's the universe, or if it's, you can you can kind of reach that place within other people, like that spirit place where it's not something that can be so well defined in words, but it can be very powerful if it's done with sound. And um, and since it's not like I'm making music and it's just sound. It's
mhm.
it's it's like 95% of the time it's sound that is in some way interacting with an image. So I guess, I don't know. It's just something. There's a magic, there's an alchemy, there's a lyricism, there's a poetry, and I think that's kind of what I'm hoping happens every time I sit down for some sound design.
I never thought about it like that, but it's beautiful. It's a great segue to the last question, to be honest, which is if you could choose one role in the credits you'd be remembered for long after you're gone, and by credits I mean like the credits of life, what would it be? It doesn't need to be a film credit. It could be dad, it could be collaborator, it could be mentor.
That's funny. All of the above for sure. Dad, collaborator, and mentor. Um, I like the term collaborator because that includes dad and mentor. You
Mm,
can't be, I don't think you can be a good dad or parent or a mentor without an amount of collaboration, whether it's with your children, um, your partner, and the people that you're working with. And certainly, it's the collaboration. Um, it's the collaboration, and then it's your voice. It's having a voice. And I know that's a bit abstract in terms of you know what to be remembered for, and it's not like I'm a literally a singer or anything. But I think purposely I didn't go that route because I like the idea that it's a collaborative, that you're adding a color or you're adding a flavor within a collaborative work with people, where there's, visual elements and, so many other elements of making a film that are not sound related. So to provide that sound component as part of this greater tapestry, that's collaboration. So let's go with collaboration.
I love that. It's all encompassing, so it's perfect. Thank you so much for coming on. This was a very meaningful episode for many reasons, so I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate the conversation, the opportunity to kind of, I don't know, look back, see what it all means, and but just to, I don't know, to talk about it, and I just I appreciate that.